Hey everyone, tonight we travel back to a time when dragons ruled the waves. Not mythical fire-breathing beasts, but entire armadas of them. Colossal wooden ships with blood-red sails, sailing under the banner of the dragon throne. Imagine you're a fisherman off the coast of India in the early 1400s. You look up and see a forest of masts appearing on the horizon, a floating city moving silently towards you, a fleet so vast and technologically advanced, it makes every other ship on the planet look like a child's toy. This is a story you probably don't know, about a chapter of history that was almost completely erased. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this journey. Forget the pirates and the storms. The rampant seasickness and the utter lack of a decent internet connection would get you first, to say nothing of the scurvy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always great to see where you're all joining from, so post your city and your local time down below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Before we begin, you need to take the familiar map of history that hangs in your mind and gently set it aside. We all know the conventional story of the Age of Discovery. It is a story that starts with small wooden ships from Portugal and Spain creeping down the coast of Africa. A story of brave, hard-bitten European mariners like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan pushing back the frontiers of a dark and scary world. It's a great story, but it is, at best, the second half of the book. The first, and arguably more spectacular, half begins almost a century earlier, not in the bustling ports of Europe, but in the heart of the world's oldest, largest, and most advanced civilization, Ming Dynasty China. What you have to understand, right from the outset, is the sheer mind-boggling scale of what we're talking about. Between the years 1405 and 1433, the Chinese Empire launched 7 epic naval expeditions into the Indian Ocean. This was not a handful of ships tentatively exploring the unknown. This was the Ming Dynasty sending a clear and unambiguous message to the entire known world. And that message was delivered by the largest and most powerful naval fleet the world had ever seen. We are talking about armadas of up to 300 ships crewed by nearly 28,000 men. To put that in perspective, Columbus's first voyage to the Americas in 1492 consisted of 3 ships, the largest of which was maybe 85 feet long, and a total crew of about 90 men. The flagship of the Chinese fleet was over 400 feet long. The entire crew of Columbus's voyage could have comfortably fit into a corner of one of the Chinese fleet's supply vessels. This raises the central question, the great mystery that hangs over this entire story. If China had this incredible technological and numerical superiority, if they began this era of global exploration a full century before the Europeans, why did their story end while Europe's was just beginning? Why isn't this common knowledge? Why did these voyages, after 30 years of unparalleled success, suddenly stop? And why was the evidence of their journeys so thoroughly and deliberately erased that this incredible chapter of human history was almost lost forever? The expeditions are known to history as the voyages of the treasure fleet. It's a romantic name, but a little misleading. It conjures up images of conquistadors hunting for El Dorado. The reality was far more complex. The ships were laden with treasures, yes. Thousands of bolts of fine silk, chests filled with the world's most advanced porcelain, intricate lacquerware, and gold and silver. But these were not for plunder. They were primarily for trade and for gifts, a demonstration of China's immense wealth and manufacturing power. The treasures they sought in return were equally varied. Exotic spices like pepper and frankincense, rare woods, medicinal herbs, precious gems, and most famously, exotic animals that would astonish the imperial court. It was less yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum, and more please accept this flawless Ming vase as a token of the emperor, supreme benevolence, and kindly point us in the direction of your finest rhinoceroses. The sheer scale and ambition of these voyages have led to some wild speculation. There's a famous and highly controversial popular theory, often called the 1421 theory, which claims these fleets went much further than the historical record shows, circumnavigating the globe, discovering America 70 years before Columbus, and charting Antarctica. While this makes for a thrilling story, it's almost universally rejected by mainstream historians due to a lack of any credible evidence. It's a bit like the Forrest Gump theory of history, where the treasure fleet was secretly present at every major global event. The reality is amazing enough on its own. The core of the real scholarly debate is more subtle. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the voyages was economic, to dominate trade routes, diplomatic, to bring the world into a China-centric tribute system, or military, a raw projection of power to awe the world into submission. To understand how this was even possible, you have to transport yourself back to the very beginning of the 15th century. Europe is a fragmented collection of squabbling backwater kingdoms, still recovering from the Black Death. But in the east, the Ming dynasty rules over a unified and prosperous China. The population is over 100 million. Its capital city, Nanjing, is the largest city in the world. They have the compass, gunpowder, and the printing press. They are, without any doubt, the world's reigning superpower. And on the dragon throne sits a new, ambitious, and deeply insecure emperor, with a vision that will soon launch 1,000 ships. The world of the early 15th century is a Chinese world, and at its absolute center, on a throne of carved lacquer and gold, sits one of the most formidable and ambitious rulers in all of history. His personal name is Zhu Di, but you will know him by his reign title, the Yongle Emperor. It translates to perpetual happiness, which, given his path to power, is a piece of political branding so audacious you almost have to admire it. It's like a loan shark calling his business sunshine and cuddles. To understand the sheer, world-altering ambition that launched the treasure fleets, you must first understand the man who commanded them into existence. Your journey takes you to his new grand capital, Beijing. Here he has commissioned a project of almost unimaginable scale, the construction of a new imperial palace, a city within a city that we now call the Forbidden City. You walk through vast courtyards, past gates guarded by bronze lions, under the sweeping yellow-tiled roofs of audience halls. This is a place designed to awe, to intimidate, to make any visitor feel the immense, unchallengeable power of the emperor. And it all stems from one deep, inescapable fact. The Yongle Emperor was a usurper, and he was profoundly insecure about it. He was never meant to be emperor. He was the fourth son of the dynasty's founder, and the throne had passed as intended to his nephew, the Jianwen Emperor. Zhu Di was a brilliant, hardened military commander, the Prince of Yan, who had spent his life guarding China's northern frontier against the Mongols. He was powerful, respected, and deeply resentful of his young, scholarly nephew in the capital. So in 1399, he did what ambitious, resentful princes with large armies often do. He rebelled. A brutal 3-year civil war tore China apart. It ended in 1402 when Zhu Di's army broke through the walls of the then capital, Nanjing. In the ensuing chaos, the imperial palace was set ablaze. Amidst the fire and the slaughter, the Jianwen Emperor, his empress, and their eldest son vanished. The official court record, hastily rewritten by the new emperor, states that they all perished in the flames, but no bodies were ever conclusively identified. And so the rumors began, whispers that would haunt the Yongle Emperor for the rest of his life. The nephew had escaped. Disguised as a Buddhist monk, he had slipped out of the burning city and was now wandering in exile, a living, breathing challenge to the legitimacy of the man on the dragon throne. Everything the Yongle Emperor did from that moment on can be seen as an attempt to cement his authority and erase the stain of his usurpation. He needed to prove to the world and to himself that he held the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. This is why he embarked on a series of spectacular and fantastically expensive projects. He moved the capital to his personal power base in Beijing and built the Forbidden City. He commissioned the Yongle Encyclopedia, a gargantuan effort to compile and preserve all of Chinese knowledge. And he gave the order to build a fleet of ships larger than anything the world had ever seen. The treasure fleet was the ultimate legitimacy project. It was a declaration to the world that China was not weakened by civil war, but was stronger, more prosperous, and more glorious than ever under its new dynamic ruler. But a quirky and persistent theory suggests there was a second secret motive behind the voyages. One of the admiral's clandestine missions was to search for the fugitive nephew. It's a compelling idea, adding a layer of spy thriller intrigue to the grand naval adventure. It's like a 15th century version of The Fugitive, but with way more ships and a distinct possibility of running into giraffes. This brings us to a central debate about this entire historical episode. Historians still argue whether the Yongle Emperor's primary motivation was personal, a colossal and expensive act of political therapy to bolster his own legitimacy and hunt down his rival, or if he was pursuing a coherent, long-term geopolitical strategy to establish Chinese dominance over the entire Indian Ocean maritime system. Was it all just a magnificent ego trip? Or was it a calculated grand plan to make the 15th century a Chinese century? You are brought into the emperor's presence. He is a tall, imposing figure, a warrior in a scholar's robes. He is intelligent, endlessly energetic, and a notorious micromanager, obsessed with every detail of his grand designs. You can easily imagine him as the kind of boss who would wake an official at 3 a.m. to discuss the budget for sailcloth. But he is also paranoid and capable of shocking brutality. Upon taking the throne, he unleashed a terrifying purge, executing thousands of officials and scholars who had been loyal to his nephew, in some cases exterminating their entire families. This is a man who holds the happiness and misery of millions in his hands, and he will let nothing stand in the way of his vision. He has the ambition, he has the power, and he has the almost limitless resources of the Ming Empire at his command. The order is given. The fleet will be built. Now all he needs is the right man to lead it. The Yongle Emperor has his grand vision, a dream of a world that pays homage to his dragon throne. But a dream is just a vapor without a person capable of forging it into reality. An emperor, no matter how powerful, cannot build a ship or navigate by the stars. For that, he needs an instrument, a project manager, a commander of unparalleled skill and unquestionable loyalty. And the man he chooses for this monumental task is every bit as remarkable and complex as the emperor himself. His name is Zheng. You are at the imperial court in Nanjing, the original capital, where the plans for the fleet are first laid. You see him stride into the audience hall, and the first thing you notice is his sheer physical presence. The records say he was enormous, a veritable giant of a man, some claiming he stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a voice that boomed like a temple bell. He is not a scholar or a courtier, but a warrior, yet he carries himself with a quiet, confident authority that commands respect. And his life story is one of the most incredible tales of survival and ambition you will ever encounter. Zheng He was not born Zheng He, and he was not born a Han Chinese. He was born in 1371 in the far southern province of Yunnan, and his name was Ma He. His family was part of the Hui people, a Muslim minority group in China, and they were descended from a prominent Persian official who had served the previous Mongol dynasty. This is a crucial fact. China's greatest admiral, the man who would project the power of the Ming Emperor across the world, was a Muslim from a conquered people. His childhood was shattered by the very empire he would one day serve. In 1381, when Ma He was just 10 years old, the Ming army marched south to conquer Yunnan, one of the last vestiges of Mongol rule. His father was killed in the fighting. The young boy was captured, and like many thousands of other captive boys, he suffered a brutal fate. He was castrated. This practice was designed to create a class of servants for the imperial household who could pose no threat to the dynastic bloodline. He was then sent into the service of the emperor's fourth son, the ambitious prince of Yan, Zhu Di. From this horrific beginning, an extraordinary career was born. The young eunuch, now a servant in the prince's household, proved himself to be brilliant, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. He received a first-class education in military and diplomatic arts, and rose to become one of Zhu Di's closest aides and military commanders. When the prince launched his rebellion against his nephew, Ma He fought by his side, distinguishing himself in key battles. After the victory in 1402, the new Yongle emperor rewarded his loyal servant with a new, honorific surname, Zheng. And so, Ma He became Zheng He. His status as a eunuch was key to his power. The Ming court was a viper's nest of competing factions. Primarily the emperor's personal servants, the eunuchs, and the powerful university-educated Confucian scholar bureaucrats who ran the government's civil service. The scholars despised the emperor as a violent usurper. The emperor, in turn, trusted his eunuchs implicitly. Since they could have no heirs, their loyalty was not to their own family line but to the emperor alone. They were the ultimate career-focused employees, with no family drama to distract them from their work. Zheng was the most trusted of them all, and he was in every respect the perfect man for the job. His loyalty to the emperor was absolute, forged in the crucible of war. He was a proven military strategist and logistician, but his greatest asset was his background. As a Muslim who spoke Arabic, he was uniquely equipped to be the emperor's envoy to the Indian Ocean, a world dominated by Islamic trade and culture. He could arrive in the great port cities of India, Persia, and Africa not as a complete outsider, but as a co-religionist, a man who understood their customs and could speak their language. He was also a man of remarkable adaptability. On a stone monument he erected near the end of his career, he describes his voyages. In the inscription, though a devout Muslim himself, he gives thanks to the Taoist sea goddess Tianfei for her divine protection. This wasn't a contradiction. It was smart politics and even smarter risk management. He was covering all his divine bases, praying to Allah for guidance while leaving an offering for the local goddess of sailors. It's a move any successful project manager would understand. The exact nature of his command is still a matter of some discussion. We call him Admiral Zheng, a title that implies a single supreme commander. Historians still argue whether he held this absolute authority on all 7 voyages, or if he was the head of a leadership committee that included other powerful eunuchs and generals. The imperial records are often vague on such details, but there is no doubt that he was the central figure, the enduring symbol of the entire enterprise. You look at this man of stunning contradictions, a Muslim who served the Son of Heaven, a eunuch who was one of the world's great military leaders, a victim of Ming conquest who became its greatest global emissary. It was this complex, brilliant, and uniquely qualified man that the Yongle emperor entrusted with his grand, world-altering vision. The emperor has his vision, and he has his admiral. Now they need a fleet, and not just any fleet, but the largest and most advanced armada the world has ever known. To see how this dream becomes a reality of timber and iron, you must leave the perfumed, silent halls of the Forbidden City and travel to the banks of the mighty Yangtze River, just outside Nanjing. You hear the place long before you see it. It's a low, continuous roar, a cacophony of thousands of hammers, the rhythmic rasp of giant saws, the shouts of men, and the groan of wood under strain. This is the Longjiang shipyard, the industrial heart of the Ming Navy, and for a few short years it is the busiest and most ambitious manufacturing center on Earth. You step into a scene of what can only be described as organized chaos. The scale of it is staggering. As far as you can see, the riverbank is a hive of activity, a sprawling complex of workshops, forges, storehouses, and dry docks. Tens of thousands of men are at work. You see teams of sawyers, their muscles straining as they pull a 2-man saw through a log the size of a small car. You see blacksmiths, their faces lit by the glow of the forge, hammering out iron nails by the barrelful. You see sailmakers stitching together vast acres of silk and canvas, and rope makers twisting hemp fibers into cables as thick as a man's thigh. The air is thick with the smell of sawdust, the acrid smoke of the forges, and the sharp, pungent scent of pine resin and tung oil. This isn't just a shipyard. It's an entire city dedicated to a single monumental purpose. The most incredible features of this industrial landscape are the dry docks. While European shipwrights for centuries to come would be forced to build their vessels on sloping beaches or riverbanks, the Chinese had long ago perfected the use of dry docks. You stand at the edge of one, a massive basin dug out of the earth, perhaps 450 feet long and 150 feet wide. It is lined with stone and fitted with a complex system of sluice gates to control the flow of water from the river. Inside this massive man-made cavern, protected from the river's currents, the skeleton of a giant is taking shape. This is where the treasure ships are born. The logistics of supplying this operation are almost as impressive as the engineering itself. The wood alone is a miracle of supply chain management. The great ships required enormous timbers of teak, fir, and camphor wood. These massive logs were harvested in forests thousands of miles away in the southern provinces and then floated down the river systems for years to reach Nanjing. The amount of iron needed for nails, anchors, and fittings would have exhausted the output of entire regions. The guy in charge of sourcing 10,000 perfectly forged anchor bolts and 1,000,000 linear feet of rope probably didn't get a lot of sleep and definitely deserved a raise. And then there's the waterproofing. The secret to the longevity and durability of these ships was tung oil. It's a natural, transparent oil pressed from the nut of the tung tree, and when applied to wood and exposed to the air, it hardens into a tough, flexible, and completely waterproof seal. It protected the timber from the ravages of the sea, from rot and wood-boring worms. The entire shipyard is saturated with its distinctive nutty smell. They used so much of it, you get the feeling the ships were not only waterproof but were probably impervious to most other liquids and tasted vaguely of walnuts. This is not a project built by brute force alone. You are witnessing a masterpiece of organization. It's a pre-modern assembly line. Different workshops specialize in mass-producing specific components. One area makes the curved structural ribs. Another focuses on the hull planking. A third on the masts and rudders. These prefabricated parts are then brought to the dry docks for final assembly. It is a system of immense efficiency and skill. Of course, the records are not as complete as we would like. The Longjiang yards were the main but not the only center of naval construction. Historians still argue whether the very largest of the treasure ships, the Great Baoshuan, were constructed exclusively here in these massive dry docks, or if other imperial shipyards had the capacity to build them as well. The exact number of ships built for each voyage is also a source of endless debate, a puzzle pieced together from fragmented and sometimes contradictory accounts. You stand and watch as the final planks are hammered into place on the ship in the dry dock. A signal is given. With a great groan of wood and rope, the main sluice gate is opened. The muddy brown water of the Yangtze begins to pour into the basin. Slowly, majestically, the water level rises. The massive wooden structure, which has sat motionless on blocks for months, gives a slight shudder, and then, with an almost imperceptible grace, it floats. A great cheer erupts from the thousands of workers who line the edge of the dock. Their colossal creation is alive. It is no longer just a collection of wood and iron. It is a ship, a giant of the sea, ready to join the Emperor's Grand Armada. The great ship is afloat, anchored in the middle of the broad, muddy Yangtze. You are brought out to it on a small skiff, a tiny water bug scuttling across the river's surface. As you draw closer, the true brain-melting scale of the vessel begins to dawn on you. From the shore, it looked big. Up close, it is a floating mountain range. It is a moving section of the Great Wall that has decided to take up a life at sea. Your mind struggles to process what you are seeing. This is not a ship in any sense that you understand. This is a behemoth, a creature of wood and will that seems to defy the very laws of nature. You are floating in the shadow of a Baokuan, a treasure ship. According to the official Ming histories, these largest vessels in Zheng He's fleet were a staggering 440 feet long and 180 feet wide. Let's pause for a moment and try to wrap our heads around that number. 440 feet. That's 1.5 football fields. That is longer than any wooden ship that would be built by anyone, anywhere, for the next 400 years. It is a vessel of such colossal proportions that it sounds like a myth, a tall tale told by sailors. To give you a real, visceral sense of the scale, let's bring in our old friend, Christopher Columbus. His flagship, the Santa Maria, the largest of his 3 vessels, was about 85 feet long. You could take the Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta, line them up end to end on the main deck of this Chinese treasure ship, and still have enough room left over to play a decent game of badminton. The entire crew of Columbus's voyage, all 90 of them, could have been housed in one of the treasure ship's storage holds with room to spare for their luggage. This Chinese vessel displaced thousands of tons of water, the Santa Maria a few hundred. This isn't a comparison of apples and oranges. This is a comparison of an apple to an entire orchard. You crane your neck back and look up. A forest of 9 masts, each one a testament to the giant trees that had to be felled to create it. towers over you, reaching for the clouds. From the masts hang the characteristic Chinese lug sails, stiffened with bamboo battens which made them incredibly efficient and easy to manage. And they were dyed a deep, intimidating blood red, a color that would have been visible from miles away. The ship is not just an exercise in size, but in power. Now we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the giant ship in the river. These dimensions, recorded in the Ming texts, are so extreme that they have become a source of intense scholarly controversy. Historians still argue whether these figures should be taken as literal truth, or if they represent a form of imperial propaganda, an exaggeration designed to glorify the Yongle emperor's reign. Some modern naval architects argue that a wooden ship of this length and breadth would have been structurally unsound, that the stresses of the open ocean would have torn it apart. They propose more modest, though still enormous dimensions, perhaps closer to 250 or 300 feet. But then, there is the physical evidence. In the 1960s, during construction work at the site of the old Longjiang shipyards, workers unearthed a gigantic wooden rudder post. It is 36 feet long. Based on the standard proportions of a Chinese junk, a rudder post of this size would be fitted to a ship between 450 and 500 feet long. It is a single massive piece of timber that seems to confirm the fantastic numbers of the ancient texts. And you have already seen the dry docks, basins easily large enough to cradle a vessel of such epic proportions. Why build a 450-foot dry dock if you only intend to build 250-foot ships? The reason for the immense size probably had little to do with speed or efficiency. The point of the treasure ship was its very existence. It was a tool of shock and awe diplomacy. It was built to be overwhelming. Imagine being a port official in a small kingdom in Sumatra or Ceylon. You look out to sea and you see this floating fortress, this city of wood, bristling with cannon and soldiers, appears on your horizon. It is a statement of power so absolute, so undeniable, that it ends any argument before it can even begin. This wasn't just a ship. It was the 15th century equivalent of parking your solid gold aircraft carrier in your neighbor's swimming pool. It was the ultimate flex. You finally climb a rope ladder and haul yourself onto the deck. The feeling is one of profound stability. It is so vast and so wide that it barely seems to move on the river's current. It feels less like a ship and more like a city square. You can see wooden pavilions, living quarters for the officers, and even, it is said, small gardens in planter boxes where the crew grew fresh ginger and vegetables to ward off scurvy. There is enough space here for hundreds, if not thousands, of men. This vessel is not just a means of transport. It is a mobile, sovereign piece of the Ming Empire, and it is about to take that empire to the farthest corners of the known world. You stand on the vast open deck of the treasure ship, a space so large it feels more like a town square than a part of a boat. But the true genius of this vessel isn't just its size. It's the hidden technology that makes this colossal structure possible, a suite of engineering marvels that were centuries ahead of their time. To see it, you must leave the sun and the wind behind. You head for a wide hatchway and descend a steep ladder into the belly of the beast. The air below deck is cool and dim, thick with the smell of tung oil, pine tar, and the faint, damp scent of the bilge. The space is a cathedral of wood, a labyrinth of massive hand-hewn timbers lit by the occasional swaying lantern. The sheer scale of the internal construction is breathtaking. The support beams are as thick as ancient trees, and the hull planking is a layered wall of solid teak. But as your eyes adjust, you notice the feature that is arguably the most important invention in the history of shipbuilding, and it was perfected by the Chinese centuries before anyone else, the watertight bulkhead. You are standing in one of a series of large, independent compartments that make up the ship's interior. The hull is not one big, open space. It is divided by massive transverse walls, running from the floor of the hull all the way up to the main deck, sealing each section off from the next. This simple but brilliant design provides two enormous advantages. First, the bulkheads act as internal cross-bracing, giving the enormous flat-bottomed hull a level of structural rigidity that would otherwise be impossible. They are the ship's skeleton, preventing the colossal vessel from hogging and sagging in heavy seas. The second advantage is safety. If the ship were to strike a reef or be holed by a cannonball, the damage would be contained. Water would flood the breached section, but the bulkheads would prevent it from spreading to the rest of the ship. This meant the vessel could suffer significant damage in one area and still remain afloat and operational. This is the very same principle that is used to protect modern submarines and aircraft carriers. The European method of shipbuilding at the time, by contrast, was basically just to build a big wooden bucket and hope you didn't hit anything. If you did, your only option was to pray. The Chinese had engineered a solution. You walk towards the stern of the ship, to the chamber that houses the steering mechanism. Here, another piece of advanced technology is on display. The stern post rudder. The massive rudder, a single gigantic plank of wood, is mounted centrally on the stern of the ship and controlled by a system of ropes and tackles. This allowed a single helmsman or a small team to steer the colossal vessel with a surprising degree of precision. It was far more efficient than the clumsy side-mounted steering oars that European ships were still using, and the Chinese had even refined this design with a subtle but brilliant innovation. You notice that the massive rudder blade is pierced with a series of diamond-shaped holes. This is a fenestrated rudder. Early Chinese engineers discovered through trial and error that cutting these windows, or fenestrae, into the rudder allowed some water to flow through. This dramatically reduced the strain and drag on the rudder as it was being turned, making the ship much easier to steer, without significantly compromising its effectiveness. It's the 15th century equivalent of adding speed holes to make your car go faster, except in this case it actually worked. The very structure of the ship is a source of ongoing discussion. Historians still argue whether the incredible strength of these giant hulls came primarily from the powerful transverse bulkheads, or if it relied on massive unseen longitudinal timbers, a series of internal keels or a dragon's spine that ran the entire length of the vessel. Since no complete wreck of a treasure ship has ever been discovered, the exact secrets of their construction remain a matter of educated guesswork, a puzzle pieced together from historical texts and archaeological finds like the giant rudder post. You navigate the maze of compartments. The bulkheads don't just provide safety. They create a perfectly organized modular interior. One compartment is filled with giant ceramic jars of fresh water. Another is packed with sacks of rice. A third is a stable for horses, and a fourth is a barracks for soldiers. The interior is so vast and complex that you imagine new sailors were given a map and warned not to wander off, lest they be found 3 weeks later, hopelessly lost in the dried noodle section. You emerge, blinking, back into the sunlight of the main deck. You have a new appreciation for this vessel. It is not just a big ship. It is a sophisticated and highly advanced piece of technology. It is the culmination of 1,000 years of Chinese naval engineering, a machine whose size, safety, and efficiency were simply unmatched anywhere else in the world. You are standing on the deck of a giant, a vessel that single-handedly redefines the meaning of the word ship. But the true, mind-altering scale of the Yongle Emperor's ambition only becomes clear when you look out at the water around you. Your ship is not alone. From every direction more ships are arriving, a seemingly endless procession of vessels of all shapes and sizes, gathering in the vast anchorage at the mouth of the Yangtze. This is not a voyage of a single ship. This is the assembly of a floating city. Before your eyes, an armada of staggering proportions is taking shape. This is a mobile community of nearly 28,000 people, sailors, soldiers, doctors, interpreters, chefs, and astronomers, and it must be able to sustain itself for months, even years far from any friendly port. It requires a level of logistical planning that is almost impossible to comprehend. This is not just a fleet. It is a nation in miniature, and every aspect of a nation's needs has been accounted for. The colossal treasure ships, the Baochuan, are the heart of the fleet. They are the flagships, the command centers, the floating embassies that carry Zheng, his highest-ranking officers, foreign diplomats, and the most precious cargoes of silk and porcelain. But these majestic giants, as immense as they are only a small fraction of the total fleet. They are the noble cavalry. The rest of the armada is the infantry, the supply train, and the artillery that makes the entire enterprise possible. You watch as the other specialized vessels take their positions. There are the Machuan, the horse ships. These are still massive vessels in their own right, each capable of carrying dozens of horses, which were used as diplomatic gifts for foreign rulers or as transport for high-ranking officials on land. These ships also carried vital repair supplies, huge timbers, coils of bamboo cable, and barrels of tung oil to fix any damage the fleet might sustain on its long journey. Then come the Liangchuan, the supply ships. These are the floating granaries, their holds packed to the rafters with the staple food that will fuel the 28,000 men of the fleet: rice, wheat, and soybeans. Following them are the troop transports, the Bengchuan, carrying thousands of Ming soldiers in their distinctive lamellar armor, their mission to protect the fleet from pirates and to provide a suitably intimidating military escort for Zheng He's diplomatic missions. But perhaps the most critical vessels of all are the humble Shuichuan, the water tankers. These are ships whose primary cargo is fresh water, stored in enormous wooden tubs and sealed tanks. An army, it is said, marches on its stomach, but a navy sails on its water supply. Running out of fresh water in the middle of the Indian Ocean is the kind of catastrophic mistake you only get to make once. The very survival of the fleet depends on these floating cisterns, and patrolling the perimeter of this vast, slow-moving city is a swarm of smaller, faster, and more nimble warships. These are the sleek Zhanchuan, designed not for cargo, but for combat. With their multiple decks, high stern castles, and batteries of small cannons and rockets, they are the fleet's teeth, ready to fend off any pirates foolish enough to challenge the Emperor's armada. All told, the fleet assembling before you numbers over 250 ships. When it finally sets sail, it will cover several square miles of ocean. It is a moving island of wood and sail, a testament to the awesome industrial might and organizational genius of the Ming Empire. And the logistics of keeping this city alive are fascinating. To supplement their dried staples, they brought livestock like pigs and chickens with them. They trailed huge nets to catch fish, which were then kept alive in water-filled compartments created by the watertight bulkheads. And on the decks of the larger ships, they grew their own fresh produce, ginger, onions, and soybeans in large planter boxes, a simple but brilliant defense against the sailors' ancient scourge, scurvy. How was this vast and complex beast controlled at sea? With no radio, communication was a constant challenge. Historians still argue whether the fleet always traveled as a single, massive convoy, a formation that would have been incredibly unwieldy, or if it often broke up into smaller, specialized squadrons that sailed along different routes to a prearranged rendezvous. Command and control would have depended on a complex and carefully choreographed ballet of signal flags during the day, colored lanterns at night, and a cacophony of drums, gongs, and horns to broadcast orders across the waves. Trying to coordinate it all must have been like attempting to stage a rock festival using only carrier pigeons and a bullhorn. The final preparations are underway. The last of the supplies are being loaded. The soldiers are running drills on the decks. The astronomers are making their final observations of the heavens. A palpable sense of anticipation hangs in the air. Soon, this great floating city, this masterpiece of engineering and logistics, will weigh anchor, sever its connection to the land, and sail out into the boundless ocean, carrying the dragon's banner to the far shores of the world. The preparations are complete. The last of the water jars has been filled. The last bolt of silk has been stowed in the holds. An expectant quiet has fallen over the vast fleet, a held breath that stretches across miles of water and involves nearly 30,000 men. You are standing on the deck of Zheng He's flagship. It is the autumn of 1405. A decree, written on yellow silk and bearing the vermilion seal of the Yongle Emperor, has arrived. The mandate is given. The time has come. A single massive drum on the command deck is struck. The deep, resonant boom echoes across the water, a sound that is both a heartbeat and a command. Instantly, the sound is answered by hundreds of other drums from across the fleet, a rolling thunder that shakes the very air. This is the signal. On hundreds of ships, thousands of sailors, their bare feet planted firmly on the wooden decks, begin to chant. It is a rhythmic, guttural work song, the sound of pure human effort, as they lean into the giant wooden capstans and begin the agonizingly slow process of raising the anchors. You hear the groan of the thick hempen cables, the clank of iron, and the final sucking splash as the anchors break free from the riverbed's muddy grip. Then a second command rings out. With a sound like a rushing wind, thousands of sailors scramble up the rigging. The great blood-red sails, which have been tightly furled to the masts, are released. They drop down not in a chaotic tumble, but in a controlled, elegant cascade, as the bamboo battens snap them open. Within minutes, the river is transformed into a field of colossal red flowers, a spectacle of such overwhelming color and scale that it seems to defy reality. The wind, blowing gently down the river, catches in the vast expanse of silk, and you feel a slight, almost imperceptible shudder run through the deck beneath your feet. The ship is moving. The voyage has begun. The fleet does not sail immediately into the open ocean. Its first journey is a long, slow procession down the mighty Yangtze River, from the shipyards at Nanjing to the coast. As the armada passes, people gather on the riverbanks to watch in stunned silence. Farmers stop their work in the fields. Fishermen pull their small boats to the side. They are witnessing a floating parade of imperial power, a spectacle that no one who saw it would ever forget. The message is clear, not just for the distant kingdoms the fleet will visit, but for the emperor's own subjects. This is the might of the Ming dynasty. This is the glory of the Yongle emperor. You can feel the mix of emotions swirling through the crew. For the veteran soldiers and sailors, there is a quiet professionalism. But for the thousands of younger men, many of whom have never been on a ship before, it is a heady cocktail of excitement and sheer terror. They are part of the greatest expedition in the history of the empire. But they are also leaving their homes, their families, and everything they have ever known, for a journey that will last for 2 years, and take them into waters that exist only in rumor and legend. Amidst all the grandeur, their biggest, most immediate concern is probably whether the ship's cook knows how to make more than one kind of noodle. Before the fleet commits to the open sea, it makes a final crucial stop at one of the coastal temples dedicated to Tianfei, the celestial consort also known as Mazu, the goddess of the sea. Zheng, his senior officers and a large retinue go ashore to make offerings of food and incense, to burn paper money, and to pray for her divine protection. It is a vital ritual, a recognition that for all their technological prowess, for all their cannons and their giant ships, they are ultimately at the mercy of the ocean's whims. It is always a good idea to be on friendly terms with the deity, who decides whether you sink or swim. The exact nature of the fleet's grand departure from Nanjing is lost to us. Historians still argue whether it was a massive, state-sponsored public festival, with the emperor himself presiding over the ceremonies, or a more practical, low-key naval affair. The records that survive are frustratingly silent on the pageantry, but whether it was with a grand spectacle or a quiet professional departure, the result is the same. The fleet finally clears the mouth of the Yangtze and enters the vast, gray-green expanse of the East China Sea. The familiar shores of the Middle Kingdom begin to recede behind you. The air smells different, sharper, laced with salt. The motion of the ship changes, the gentle river glide replaced by the long, deep, ceaseless swell of the open ocean. The floating city is now on its own. The great continent of China is behind you. Before you, there is only water. The shoreline of the Middle Kingdom has dissolved into the haze behind you. Your world has shrunk to the groaning timbers of the ship and the vast, featureless expanse of the sea. All around you, the lanterns of the other ships in the armada bob and sway in the darkness, a constellation of man-made stars on a black ocean. You look up. Above, the true stars are a brilliant, terrifyingly clear canopy of light. There are no landmarks here, no roads, no signposts. There is only the endless water. So how, in an age before GPS, before satellites, before even reliable clocks, do you guide a floating city of 300 ships across 2,000 miles of open ocean to a precise destination on the other side of the world? You make your way to the Admiral's Bridge, a high sheltered deck at the stern of the treasure ship. Here, under the soft glow of a lantern, the ship's chief navigator is at work. He and his team are the quiet, unsung geniuses who make this entire enterprise possible. And their primary tool, the bedrock of all their calculations, is a Chinese invention that would eventually change the course of world history, the magnetic compass. You watch as he consults the device. It is a simple but beautiful object. A small, magnetized iron needle, shaped like a fish or a spoon, floating in a shallow bowl of water. The bowl sits on a gimbaled stand to keep it level with the ship's motion. Around the edge of the bowl is a lacquered wooden dial, marked not with 4 or 8 directions but with 24 distinct compass points. The needle, relentlessly, stubbornly, points south, as early Chinese compasses did. This simple device gives the fleet its constant, unwavering sense of direction. In the darkest night, in the thickest fog, in the most violent storm, they always know which way is which, but the compass only tells you your heading, not your position. For that, you must turn your gaze from the bowl of water to the sky above. The navigator unfurls a long silk scroll. This is a star chart, a celestial map. We have copies of the charts used on these voyages, compiled later in a book called the Wubei Ji. They are not maps as we would recognize them, but more like a set of highly detailed sailing directions, a long strip chart showing the route from one port to the next. They show the compass bearings you must follow, the number of days you must sail, and crucial landmarks like islands or reefs. And drawn along the top of the chart are diagrams of the stars. This is the art of celestial navigation. You watch as the navigator uses a simple sighting tube to find Polaris, the North Star. He needs to measure its height, its altitude, above the horizon. To do this, he uses a beautifully simple and effective tool, his own hand. He holds his hand out at arm's length, palm facing him. The distance between the horizon and Polaris is, he declares, 12 Z. A Z is a finger, a unit of angular measurement. This is the original digital navigation. By knowing the height of the North Star in fingers and consulting his charts, he can determine his ship's latitude, its position north or south on the globe, with remarkable accuracy. This combination of compass and star sighting allows the fleet to cross the open ocean with a confidence that would have been unthinkable for European sailors of the time. They are not just hugging the coast. They are following needle paths, precise compass-bearing routes that cut straight across the deep water of the South China Sea. Of course, when the stars are obscured by clouds, they must rely on dead reckoning, calculating their position based on their last known location, their compass heading, and their estimated speed. But this was always a system prone to error. The real magic was in the constant correction of their position by the eternal, unchanging clockwork of the heavens. The science of it is breathtaking, but the complete body of navigational knowledge was not entirely their own. The routes across the Indian Ocean had been plied for centuries by Arab, Persian, and Indian merchants. Historians still argue whether the incredibly detailed charts used by Zheng He's fleet were created entirely from scratch by his own navigators, or if they were the culmination of centuries of knowledge, a grand compilation of pre-existing Chinese and Arab maps and sailing directions. Was Zheng He a trailblazer charting a new world, or a brilliant synthesizer, verifying and perfecting a map that already existed in pieces? You stand on the deck with the navigator, the warm night wind on your face. The ship plows onward through the darkness, a steady, rhythmic creaking of wood and rope. The navigator is a master of a hybrid art, a man who combines the hard science of astronomy with the deep sensory knowledge of the sea. He can read the color of the water, the pattern of the swell, the flight of the birds. He can, it is said, even smell the land long before it is visible. It is this symphony of technology, science, and profound personal skill that holds the fate of 28,000 men in its hands, guiding them surely and safely across the vast, dark, and silent sea. For weeks, your world has been an endless cycle of blue water and black starry nights, the creak of the ship and the rhythm of the waves. Then one morning, a cry rings out from the lookout high in the mast. Land. You rush to the rail and see it. A hazy, dark green line on the horizon, slowly resolving into a lush, tropical coastline fringed with palm trees and mist-shrouded mountains. After crossing the vast open expanse of the South China Sea, the fleet has arrived at its first port of call, the Kingdom of Champa, in what is now modern-day Vietnam. As the armada approaches the coast and anchors in a wide turquoise bay, you try to imagine the scene from the shore. For the local Cham fishermen and farmers, the sudden appearance of this fleet must have been a terrifying, world-altering event. Imagine hundreds of ships, led by giants with 9 blood-red sails, appearing as if from nowhere and covering the entire horizon. It would have looked like an invasion from another planet, a visitation from the gods or the end of the world. This is shock and awe diplomacy in its purest form. But Zheng does not send his soldiers ashore with swords drawn. He sends his diplomats. You watch as he and his senior staff descend from the treasure ship into ornate barges, their silk robes brilliant in the tropical sun. They are rowed to the shore, where the nervous king of Champa and his entire court are waiting. There, with great ceremony, Zheng presents a letter from the Yongle emperor, written on the finest silk scroll. He then bestows the official gifts, bolts of exquisite silk brocade, intricate porcelain vases, and chests of gold and silver thread. The message is clear, but it is a message of diplomacy, not conquest. The primary goal here is to invite Champa to rejoin the Ming tribute system. This was the traditional framework for all of Chinese foreign relations. It wasn't a system of taxation or direct colonial rule. Instead, it was a vast, hierarchical system of ritualized trade and diplomacy, with the Chinese emperor, the Son of Heaven, at the undisputed center of the universe. A foreign ruler would acknowledge the emperor's superiority by sending a tribute mission to China with gifts of local products. In return, the emperor was obligated by Confucian etiquette to bestow even more lavish and valuable gifts upon the tributary. It was essentially a glorified gift exchange program with immense geopolitical implications. And for a smaller state, it was an incredibly lucrative way to gain official access to the wealthy Chinese market. With Champa's king suitably awed and having pledged to send an envoy to the Ming court, the fleet resupplies its water and fresh food and continues its journey south. The next major stop is the powerful island kingdom of Java, a hub of the Majapahit Empire. Here the situation is far more delicate. The fleet arrives to find Java in the midst of a bitter civil war between a recognized king and a rival claimant to the throne. Zheng must navigate this political minefield with extreme care. It's here that the fleet faces its first major crisis, and Zheng demonstrates his true genius as a diplomat. A shore party of around 170 of his men, who are in a marketplace in a territory controlled by the wrong king, are mistaken for allies of his rival and are attacked and killed. This is a catastrophic international incident. The murder of 170 representatives of the Son of Heaven is an insult of the highest order. The Javanese king is quite rightly terrified. He has the largest naval fleet in the world sitting in his harbor, with more than 20,000 soldiers who could reduce his capital to ashes in an afternoon. This is the 15th century equivalent of accidentally rear-ending a mob boss's car and then realizing all of his friends are parked behind you. But Zheng does not seek bloody revenge. He understands that his emperor's primary goal is stability, trade, and the projection of a calm, benevolent power. A war in Java would disrupt the vital trade routes and undermine the entire mission. And so, after a period of tense negotiation, he accepts the offending king's profuse apologies and a token fine of 60,000 ounces of gold, a fine which he then graciously persuades the emperor to remit. It is a masterstroke of diplomacy. He has demonstrated the terrifying extent of his power by choosing not to use it. This raises a fascinating question about the nature of these encounters. Historians still argue whether the rulers of these smaller kingdoms were genuinely intimidated into a subordinate relationship with China, or if they were sophisticated political actors who were cleverly playing along with the tribute system to advance their own economic and political interests. Were they truly vassals of the Dragon Throne, or just savvy partners who understood that a little ritual bowing was a small price to pay for access to the greatest economic superpower on Earth? Having navigated the treacherous politics of Java, the floating city continues its work, its holds now beginning to fill with the exotic goods of Southeast Asia, aromatic camphor, rare hardwoods, and the pungent resins that were the basis for incense and perfumes. The first stage of the journey has been a resounding success. The fleet has faced pirates, civil wars, and complex diplomacy, and has triumphed through a careful combination of overwhelming force and intelligent restraint. The pattern for the rest of the voyage has been set. Having navigated the delicate political currents of Java with a masterful display of restraint, the treasure fleet now turns its prows west, towards the most important and most dangerous waterway in the world, the Strait of Malacca. This narrow, humid channel separating the Malay Peninsula from the island of Sumatra is the critical choke point on the maritime route between China and India. For centuries, it has been a place of immense wealth and immense danger, its maze of islands and river estuaries providing a perfect sanctuary for pirates. And at this moment in history, the strait is ruled by a pirate king. His name is Chen Zuyi. He is a formidable and ruthless figure, a Chinese expatriate who, through violence and cunning, has carved out his own personal kingdom based in the strategic port of Palembang. With a fleet of junks and thousands of hardened followers, he is the undisputed master of the strait. All merchant ships passing through must pay him tribute, or risk being attacked, plundered, and having their crews slaughtered. He is, in short, a very successful and very violent gangster, and the emperor's fleet is now sailing directly into his territory. Zheng, he is a diplomat, but he is not a fool. He knows that the emperor's authority must be established here if the trade routes are to be secured. As the fleet approaches Palembang, word reaches the admiral, through his network of local informants, that Chen Zuyi is planning a deception. The pirate king sends envoys to the treasure fleet, proclaiming his intention to surrender peacefully and submit to the authority of the emperor. But it is a lie. His real plan is to lure the Chinese command ships into a trap, where his own fleet can swarm them, board them, and capture the admiral himself. It is an audacious plan, born of either supreme arrogance or sheer desperation. Chen Zuyi has fundamentally miscalculated. He has mistaken the fleet's diplomatic restraint in Java for weakness. He is about to learn in the most dramatic way possible that the velvet glove of Ming diplomacy conceals an iron fist of terrifying power. Zheng He, fully aware of the pirate's treachery, plays along. He accepts the feigned surrender and calmly prepares his own counter-trap. You are on the deck of a warship as a portion of the Chinese fleet sails into the wide, murky river mouth that leads to Palembang. The air is thick, hot, and still. The jungle presses in on either side of the river, a wall of suffocating green. Suddenly the trap is sprung. From hidden inlets and behind river bends, Chen Zuyi's pirate fleet emerges. It is a large and intimidating force of fast, maneuverable junks, packed with screaming, battle-hardened pirates. But what they are sailing towards is not a collection of vulnerable merchant ships. It is the disciplined, technologically superior battle squadron of the Ming Navy. What happens next is not a battle, it is a slaughter. The sheer firepower of the Ming warships is something Chen Zuyi's men have never encountered. The Chinese have cannon that fire both stone and iron shot, as well as explosive shells. They have crossbows that can fire multiple bolts. And they have gunpowder rockets and fire lances, early forms of flamethrowers that spew chemical fire across the water. The pirate junks are blown out of the water, their wooden hulls shattered by cannonballs. They are set ablaze by incendiary arrows and rockets that turn their ships into floating infernos. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, if the gun also shoots fire and explodes. The immense treasure ships, too large to navigate the river, form a blockade at the mouth, preventing any escape. For a day and a night, the river echoes with the sounds of battle, the boom of cannons, the crackle of flames, the screams of the dying. The outcome is never in doubt. When the sun rises the next day, the pirate kingdom of Chen Zuyi has been utterly annihilated. More than 5,000 of his men are dead. 10 of his ships have been burned to the waterline, and dozens more have been captured. And most importantly, Chen Zuyi himself, along with his top lieutenants, has been taken alive. This single brutal engagement is the most significant military action of all 7 voyages. Its impact is immediate and profound. Zheng He appoints a new, loyal governor in Palembang, instantly transforming the pirate den into a secure and stable protectorate of the Ming Empire. A clear, bloody, and unambiguous message has been sent to every ruler, merchant, and pirate from here to Africa. The emperor's fleet brings gifts and silk for the compliant, but it brings fire and steel for those who defy it. It was the ultimate mess around and find out moment of 15th century geopolitics. The true nature of the pirate king's plan remains a point of some conjecture. Historians still argue whether Chen Zuyi's scheme was a straightforward ambush, born of a deluded overconfidence in his own strength, or if it was a more cunning plot to feign surrender in order to isolate and capture Zheng himself. Either way, his gambit failed catastrophically. The Iron Fist has been revealed. And now, with the Strait of Malacca pacified and the sea lanes secure, the path to India and the riches of the wider Indian Ocean lies open. With the Strait of Malacca now pacified, its pirate king languishing in chains in the hold of the flagship, the treasure fleet has achieved its preliminary objectives. After further stops for trade and diplomacy, Zheng gives the order. It is time to go home. Riding the favorable winds of the southwest monsoon, the Great Armada turns its prows back towards the Middle Kingdom. The journey home is one of quiet satisfaction, the holds of the ships now heavy with the treasures, goods, and guests of the southern seas. In the summer of 1407, after 2 long years away, the fleet returns. Its arrival back at the capital of Nanjing is a moment of national triumph. The ships, their red sails perhaps a little faded by the tropical sun, form a grand procession up the Yangtze River. Crowds line the banks, their cheers echoing across the water. The 25,000 or so men who have survived the journey are returning as heroes, the agents of the Emperor's glorious vision. They have traveled to the edge of the world and have returned with proof of its wonders. The climax of the entire expedition takes place in the grand audience hall of the Imperial Palace. You are there, amidst the assembled ranks of courtiers, officials, and generals, as Zheng makes his report to the Yongle Emperor, and then the spoils of the voyage are presented. It is a spectacle of unparalleled theater, designed to awe the court and justify the astronomical expense of the mission. First comes the proof of the fleet's military might. The pirate king Chen Zuyi and his captured lieutenants are dragged before the dragon throne in chains. They are the living embodiment of those who would dare to defy the Emperor's will. Zheng recounts their treachery and their swift, violent defeat. The Yongle Emperor, in a calculated display of imperial justice, listens impassively and then gives a single, chilling order. The pirates are to be taken out and publicly executed immediately. The message to any other would-be challenger is brutally clear. The Emperor's tenderness is reserved for his friends. A new position was created for Chen Zuyi in the capital, head of the new Don't Cross the Ming Dynasty department. The job came with a very short life expectancy. Next comes the proof of the fleet's diplomatic success. A procession of foreign envoys, ambassadors from the kingdoms the fleet has visited, are led into the hall. They are dressed in their colorful and exotic native attire, their skin darker, their features different from anyone at the Chinese court. They represent kingdoms from Champa, Siam, Sumatra, and even the great spice port of Calicut in India. They perform the kowtow, the ritual prostration before the emperor, and present the tribute from their rulers. The world, it seems, is literally coming to the emperor's feet. For the Yongle emperor, the usurper, this is the ultimate validation. And then comes the tribute itself, a stunning collection of the exotic and the valuable. There are chests overflowing with the most sought-after commodity in the world, black pepper from the Malabar coast of India. There are aromatic spices like cloves and nutmeg from the islands of Indonesia. There are fragrant blocks of sandalwood, precious gems, and rare medicines. But some of the most interesting items were not valuable in a monetary sense, but were prized for their sheer novelty. One of these was sappanwood, a common wood that produced a brilliant red dye. The organizers of the fleet, in a clever bit of marketing, passed it off to the court as the legendary dragon's blood, a mythical resin said to have miraculous healing properties. It's the 15th century equivalent of selling a department store knockoff as a designer original. The emperor was apparently very impressed. The Yongle emperor is triumphant. This moment is the vindication of his entire vision. The fleet has succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. It has pacified the seas, expanded his tribute system, brought foreign kings into his orbit, and returned with a hold full of treasures, both real and creatively rebranded. The critics at court, the conservative Confucian officials who had warned that the voyages would be a ruinously expensive failure, are silenced. The emperor is like a movie producer whose risky blockbuster has just had the biggest opening weekend in history. His first thought is not to rest on his laurels, but to plan the sequel. He immediately gives the order: prepare a second voyage, even larger and more ambitious than the first. But what was the real bottom line of this enterprise? Historians still argue whether the tribute system was a net economic gain for China or a cleverly disguised net loss. The value of the luxurious silks and porcelains that the emperor gave as gifts to the foreign rulers often far exceeded the market value of the tribute he received. Was this a deliberate strategy of loss leader diplomacy, where China intentionally overpaid in order to gain immense political prestige and secure the loyalty of its tributaries? Or did the unofficial private trade conducted by merchants who traveled with the fleet generate so much profit that it more than covered the imperial government's losses? The official books might have been in the red, but the overall Chinese economy may have been booming. One thing is certain. As the executioners lead the doomed pirate king from the hall, and the exotic scent of pepper and sandalwood fills the air, no one doubts the success of the first voyage. The precedent has been set. The floating city is not a flight of fancy. It is a proven effective tool of statecraft, and its journeys have only just begun. The second voyage has come and gone, another successful mission to solidify the emperor's influence in the kingdoms of Southeast Asia. Now, on the third grand expedition, which departed China in 1409, Zheng is pushing his fleet further than ever before. For weeks they have sailed west, a lonely armada on the vast empty expanse of the Bay of Bengal, a stretch of water far wider than the South China Sea. Then finally land is sighted. You are arriving on the fabled Malabar coast of southwestern India, and the city you are approaching is the jewel of the Indian Ocean, the great global crossroads of trade, the city of spices, Calicut. As the treasure fleet drops anchor in the harbor, you realize immediately that this is a different world from the kingdoms you have visited so far. This is not a sleepy provincial court. This is a thrumming, humming, chaotic hub of international commerce. The harbor is jammed with ships from every corner of the known world. You see the elegant, lateen-rigged dhows of Arab merchants, sturdy vessels from the Persian Gulf, and even ships from the distant Swahili coast of Africa. In the streets of the city, you see a dizzying mix of peoples: local Hindu merchants in their white cotton robes, turbaned Arab traders arguing loudly over prices, Persians, Somalis, and a community of Chinese merchants who have lived here for generations. This is a truly cosmopolitan city, a melting pot of cultures, religions, and languages, all drawn here by one powerful magnet: trade. You step ashore and your senses are overwhelmed. The air is hot and humid, but it carries a scent so powerful it is almost tangible. It is the smell of wealth itself. It is the thick, pungent, and intoxicating aroma of spices. From the vast open-sided warehouses that line the waterfront, the scent of black pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, and ginger billows out in great invisible clouds. The air is so saturated with the smell of pepper that you feel, if you were to sneeze, you might accidentally become rich. This is the commodity that has made Calicut one of the richest cities on earth, the black gold of the 15th century. The ruler of this prosperous city-state is the Zamorin, a powerful Hindu king who has built his dynasty on a shrewd policy of free trade and religious tolerance. He understands that his city's wealth depends on attracting merchants from all over the world, and he welcomes the arrival of the colossal Chinese fleet. For the Zamorin, these newcomers are not a threat. They are the biggest and wealthiest customers he has ever seen. Zheng, in turn, treats the Zamorin with great respect. As he has done elsewhere, he erects a stone tablet, a stele, with an inscription in Chinese praising the Zamorin and proclaiming the friendship between the two empires, a permanent marker of the Ming presence. The Chinese envoys are plunged into a culture that is in some ways as alien as any they have yet encountered. The dominant local caste, the Nayars, from which the Zamorin's family is drawn, practices a matrilineal system of inheritance. Family names, property, and titles are all passed down through the female line. A person's most important male relative is not their father, but their maternal uncle. For the staunchly patriarchal Chinese, with their rigid system of ancestor worship based on the male line, this social structure must have been a source of endless confusion and fascination. So you're telling me your mother's brother gets the house? Their heads must have been spinning. Here in Calicut, The fleet establishes a more permanent base of operations than anywhere else so far. They build warehouses or factories to store the vast quantities of Chinese goods they intend to trade, and to stockpile the Indian goods they will purchase for the return journey. This has led to a debate among scholars. Historians still argue whether these Chinese compounds were merely commercial depots, or if they functioned as semi-official embassies and garrisons, a sign of a deeper Chinese political and military foothold in the city. Was Zheng just a trading partner, or was he establishing Calicut as the key overseas base in a burgeoning Chinese maritime empire? The main prize, the reason for this epic journey, is pepper. In the 15th century, black pepper was the ultimate luxury good, particularly in Europe, where it was astronomically expensive. It was used to flavor the bland European diet, as a preservative for meat, and as a key ingredient in medicine. By sailing directly to Calicut, the source of the world's finest pepper, Zheng was able to cut out the long chain of middlemen, the Indian merchants, the Arab sailors, the Egyptian tax collectors, and the Venetian traders, who all took a cut, driving the price up at every step. This wasn't just diplomacy. It was the most epic and ambitious grocery run in human history. You watch as the business of the fleet gets underway. A great cultural and commercial exchange is taking place. The Chinese have brought their unparalleled porcelain and silk, which are highly prized by the Indian elite. In return, the holds of the treasure ships are slowly being filled with the aromatic wealth of India. Calicut is the gateway to the West. The connections made and the knowledge gained here will embolden the fleet, proving that their reach can extend even further. The stage is now set for them to push beyond India, into the legendary seas of Arabia and Africa. You are standing inside one of the newly constructed Chinese warehouses on the waterfront of Calicut. The air is a thick perfume of pepper and sandalwood, but here, inside this cavernous wooden structure, new scents dominate. The dry, earthy smell of fine porcelain and the clean, distinct aroma of thousands of bolts of silk. The real business of the treasure fleet is about to begin. This is not the chaotic, freewheeling haggle of a public bazaar. This is a highly structured, state-to-state commercial negotiation, conducted with all the formality of a treaty signing. The process begins with a gathering of the key players. On one side, you have Admiral Zheng himself, flanked by his senior eunuch officials and the fleet's chief treasurer. On the other side is the Zamorin's chief minister, a powerful local broker known as a chetty, and the port's harbor master, the Shabandar. They meet in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by chests that have been opened to display their contents. This is a carefully orchestrated presentation, a showcase of the industrial and artistic might of the Ming Empire. A young Chinese merchant with a deference that belies his sharp eyes holds up a large blue and white porcelain dish. It is a masterpiece from the imperial kilns at Zheng, its surface a flawless, milky white, painted with a cobalt blue dragon of exquisite detail. He then unfurls a bolt of silk brocade, a river of deep crimson embroidered with gold thread that shimmers in the dim light of the warehouse. One by one, the samples are presented. Musk from the Tibetan plateau, intricate lacquerware boxes, and silver ingots. Then the negotiations begin. There is no shouting or arm-waving. It is a quiet, intense discussion. The Chinese have their prices, calculated based on the value of silver back in the Ming capital. The Indian merchants have their prices, based on the local market for pepper and pearls. The broker, the chetty, moves between the two parties, translating, cajoling, and trying to find a middle ground. They would use the abacus, the Chinese swan pan, to make their calculations, the wooden beads clicking and clacking with a speed that would seem like magic to an outsider. An experienced operator could add, subtract, multiply, and divide vast sums faster than you could with a pen and paper. The local merchants were probably still trying to do the math on a slate, while the Chinese treasurer had already calculated the fleet's net profit margin for the entire quarter. Finally, after days of careful negotiation, an agreement is reached. A fixed price is set for every category of goods, a certain weight of pepper for a bolt of mid-grade silk, a certain number of pearls for a high-quality porcelain dish. To seal the contract, Zheng and the Zamorin's minister clasp hands. A contemporary account from the fleet's interpreter, Ma Huan, describes the moment. The chetty and the chief eunuch clasp hands and the price is fixed. After the hand clasp, the price is never again altered. This was a trade by treaty, a deal sealed by honor, and of course by the fact that the party with the 400-foot ships and 20,000 soldiers was sitting in the harbor. It was the most polite, heavily armed business negotiation in history. Once the prices are fixed, a great drum is beaten at the entrance to the warehouse. This is the signal for the general trade to begin. Hundreds of smaller merchants, both Chinese from the fleet and local Indians, now surge into the area, free to buy and sell, but only at the officially sanctioned rates. The warehouses empty of their Chinese treasures and begin to fill with the wealth of India. Mountains of pepper sacks, chests of gleaming pearls and diamonds, and bales of the fine, translucent cotton textiles for which India was famous. This highly regulated system was the official face of the trade, but it's hard to imagine it was the whole story. The fleet carried nearly 28,000 men, many of them merchants and soldiers with their own small ventures. Historians still argue whether the strict prohibition on private trade was rigorously enforced, or if it was a rule that was widely ignored. It's very likely that a massive unofficial market thrived in the shadow of the official one, as thousands of individual sailors and merchants bartered for trinkets, spices, and souvenirs. This private enterprise may have been where the real, personal fortunes were made. You watch as the last of the pepper sacks are weighed and loaded onto barges to be ferried to the treasure ships. The transaction has been a masterpiece of organization. It demonstrates a profound understanding of logistics, economics, and diplomacy. This was not the behavior of a colonial power looking for a quick smash and grab. This was the action of a global superpower building a stable, predictable, and mutually profitable system of trade. It was a system built on trust and fixed prices, a system where a handshake was a binding contract, a contract that just happened to be backed up by the largest and most powerful navy on the planet. The holds of the great ships are heavy with the black pepper of Calicut, their primary mission a resounding success. But Calicut is not an endpoint. It is a gateway. It is the launching pad for the most ambitious leg of the journey yet. Leaving a portion of the fleet behind to continue trading, Zheng takes his finest ships and most experienced crews and gives an order that strikes a thrill of excitement and fear into the heart of every sailor. They will sail west again, leaving the familiar shores of India behind and venturing into the vast, unknown expanse of the Arabian Sea. For weeks they sail across an ocean of the deepest blue, guided by Arab pilots who know these waters and their seasonal winds intimately. The very quality of the air begins to change. The lush, humid, tropical atmosphere of India is baked away, replaced by a dry, clean heat that blows from the arid lands of Arabia and Persia. The sky becomes a harder, more brilliant blue. The sailors, used to the green coasts of China and Southeast Asia, now stare at a new and alien horizon. Finally, they arrive, and the sight that greets them is one of the most stunning paradoxes on Earth. Before them is the island of Hormuz, a barren, salt-encrusted rock shimmering in the brutal sun, a place almost entirely devoid of fresh water or vegetation. And yet, built upon this desolate rock is one of the richest, most luxurious, and most famous cities in the entire world. An old Arab proverb declares, "If the world is a golden ring, Hormuz is the jewel set in it." You are about to see why. Hormuz's power comes from its location. It is a cork in a bottle, a fortified island that commands the narrow strait at the entrance to the Persian Gulf. Every single ship, every single bale of silk, every single pearl that moves between Persia, Arabia, and the wider world of the Indian Ocean must pass through here. The king of Hormuz grew fantastically wealthy simply by controlling this traffic. You step ashore and the heat hits you like a physical blow. The city is a maze of narrow, winding streets, designed to create shade. The houses are built of bricks made from baked salt earth and are adorned with ingenious wind towers that catch the sea breezes and funnel them down into the rooms below, a form of natural air conditioning. The city is a masterpiece of engineering, a machine for living in an almost unlivable environment. Its very existence is a testament to the power of commerce. The island was so barren that literally everything had to be imported from the mainland. Every jug of water, every sack of grain, every piece of firewood. It was the 15th century version of Dubai, a glittering hub of international finance and luxury built on a patch of strategically located sand. You enter the Great Bazaar, and the wealth on display is simply staggering. The scent of pepper from India is now mixed with the heady aroma of frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia. You see merchants hawking the most exquisite Persian carpets, their colors as rich as jewels. There are stalls selling gleaming damascened steel from Damascus, and others displaying the lustrous pearls for which the Gulf was famous. And then there are the horses. Sleek, powerful Arabian horses, the finest in the world, are presented to the Chinese officials as potential tribute for their emperor. Zheng, the Muslim eunuch from Yunnan, is in his element here. He meets with the Persianate ruler of Hormuz, and the familiar dance of diplomacy and trade begins. Lavish gifts are exchanged. The Chinese porcelain and silks are an immediate sensation among the wealthy Persian and Arab elite, who have never seen ceramics of such quality. In return, the Chinese are eager to acquire the luxury goods of the Middle East. It's a classic dishes for ponies swap, just on a massive geopolitical scale. The strategic importance of this visit cannot be overstated. By sailing to Hormuz, the Chinese have now physically connected the two great engines of the global economy, the manufacturing powerhouse of Ming China and the commercial financial hub of the Persian Gulf. But was this purely a shopping trip? Historians still argue whether the mission to Hormuz was driven by simple commercial desire, or if it was a sophisticated geopolitical maneuver. Was Zheng trying to build an alliance with the great Persian Empire to the north as a way of outflanking other regional powers like the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt? Or was his goal even grander, to permanently wrest control of the old Silk Road away from the land-based caravan routes and redirect the entire flow of global commerce onto a maritime network dominated by his fleet? Whatever the grand strategy, the immediate result is a resounding success. The holds are now filled with goods that will cause a sensation back at the Ming court. The fleet has established China as a major player in the political and economic world of the Middle East. As you stand in the shimmering, salt-encrusted streets of this impossible city, you realize the incredible extent of the treasure fleet's reach. The emperor's mandate, which began in his new palace in Beijing, is now being proclaimed in the heart of the Islamic world. The known world is shrinking, and it is this fleet that is drawing the new map. The fleet returns from its fourth voyage in 1415, its holds once again laden with the familiar treasures of the Indian Ocean, pepper, pearls, and precious gems. But this time, it brings back something else, something alive, something so strange, so otherworldly. That word of it spreads like wildfire through the capital, drawing thousands of citizens to the streets. The fleet has brought back a monster, a marvel, a miracle, and it is a creature that will change the course of the expeditions forever. You are standing in the massive courtyard outside the main gate of the imperial palace in Nanjing. The entire court is assembled, a shimmering sea of silk robes and elaborate headdresses. The emperor himself is present. A hush falls over the crowd as a procession of foreign envoys approaches. The key ambassador is from the Sultanate of Bengal, and he is presenting a gift to the Son of Heaven. But this gift wasn't originally his. The Sultan of Bengal had himself received it as a gift from a visiting diplomat from the powerful African city-state of Malindi. And now, this living, breathing diplomatic offering, having already traveled from Africa to India, has completed the final leg of its incredible journey to China. With a gentle tug from its handlers, the creature is led forward, and a collective gasp ripples through the crowd. You have never, in your wildest dreams, imagined such an animal. It is taller than 3 men, its head moving with a serene grace high above the assembled court. Its neck is impossibly, elegantly long. Its body is covered in a coat of beautiful tawny orange spots, like the scales of a mythical beast. It has 2 small, horn-like bumps on its head, and its face, with its enormous, dark, liquid eyes and impossibly long lashes, is the most gentle and peaceful you have ever seen. You are looking at a giraffe. The Chinese court, of course, has no word for giraffe. They search their vast library of knowledge, their extensive bestiary of real and mythical creatures, for a name, for a category to place this impossible beast. And they find one. The court scholars, the most learned men in the empire, Take one look at this gentle, spotted, horn-bearing herbivore and come to a stunning and politically convenient conclusion. This is not just a strange animal from a faraway land. This is a qilin. In Chinese mythology, the qilin is one of the most sacred and auspicious creatures imaginable. It is a divine beast, a harbinger of good fortune whose rare appearance on earth is considered an unmistakable sign that a wise, just, and benevolent ruler sits on the dragon throne. Its appearance is a direct heavenly endorsement of the reigning emperor. And for the Yongle emperor, the usurper, the man still haunted by the ghost of his nephew, and the whispers of his critics, this is the greatest gift he could have possibly received. It is the cosmos itself, signing off on his rule. The connection was more than just wishful thinking. The Somali word for giraffe is gari, which, to a Chinese ear, sounds remarkably similar to the Middle Chinese pronunciation of qilin, qilin. It is likely that the name traveled with the animal, allowing the Chinese to neatly slot this new wonder into their existing mythological framework. The emperor, who is supposed to remain in the stoic seclusion of his palace, is so overjoyed that he personally walks to the palace gate to receive the divine creature. Poets are commanded to write odes in its honor. The finest court artists are commissioned to paint its portrait. The arrival of the qilin is a propaganda coup of the highest order. It's better than 100 successful trade missions. You can't put a price on a divine seal of approval, especially when it comes with its own elegant 15-foot neck. But was this a genuine case of mistaken identity? A moment of true collective wonder? Or was it a brilliant piece of political theater? Historians still argue whether the scholars and officials of the court truly believed this was the mythical beast, or if they were engaged in a shrewd act of political flattery, deliberately rebranding the exotic animal as a qilin to curry favor with their powerful and insecure emperor. Was it a miracle, or was it the most successful act of political spin in the 15th century? Whatever the truth, the impact is immediate and profound. Zheng and his men have not just brought back pepper and pearls. They have brought back tangible proof of the emperor's divine mandate. But the giraffe does something else too. It ignites the imagination. It is living, breathing evidence that the world beyond India holds wonders that are beyond their wildest speculation. If a creature like this exists, what else is out there? The desire to know, to see, and to acquire more of these marvels provides a powerful new impetus for the voyages. The next time the fleet sails, it will not stop at India. It will push on, across the Arabian Sea to the source of this incredible creature, the legendary and now very real continent of Africa. The magical giraffe, the living qilin, has electrified the Ming court and vindicated the Yongle emperor's grand vision. It is a tangible wonder from a world beyond their maps, and it has created an insatiable appetite for more. On the 5th and subsequent voyages, the mission is clear. The fleet will push past the familiar ports of India and sail into the unknown Western Ocean to find the source of this magnificent beast. Guided by experienced Arab and Indian pilots who know the monsoon winds and the sea lanes, the treasure fleet embarks on the longest and most ambitious leg of its journey yet. You are sailing for Africa. After crossing the vast empty expanse of the Arabian Sea, a journey of thousands of miles, the lookout's cry rings out once again. But this time, the land that appears on the horizon is different. It is a new continent. Your first glimpse of the coast of what is now Somalia is a sight no Chinese sailor has ever seen before. The quality of the light seems different, the heat more intense. You have arrived on the shores of the Swahili coast. Now you must erase any preconceived notions of a primitive, undiscovered land. The East African coast in the 15th century was a vibrant, wealthy, and sophisticated civilization. It was a network of independent cosmopolitan city-states, Mogadishu, Mombasa, Kilwa, and Malindi, that formed the southern rim of the Indian Ocean trading world. They were Islamic sultanates, ruled by Swahili kings who grew rich by acting as the middlemen between the gold, ivory, and exotic goods of the African interior and the vast maritime market of the Indian Ocean. You have not arrived in an uncharted wilderness. You have arrived in another center of global commerce. The fleet's primary destination is the port of Malindi in modern-day Kenya. This is the very city whose ruler sent the giraffe to Bengal that eventually made its way to China. As the Chinese armada appears on the horizon, there is no fear or suspicion. Their arrival is a cause for celebration. The King of Malindi sees the Chinese not as a threat, but as a powerful new trading partner and a potential ally against his main regional rival, the nearby city of Mombasa. When you're the guy who sent the magic giraffe, they roll out the red carpet for you when you show up with 200 of your closest friends. You go ashore and find yourself in a beautiful and prosperous city. The buildings are not made of wood or mud brick, but of gleaming white coral stone which keeps them cool in the tropical heat. The city is a bustling maze of narrow streets, mosques and stone houses with intricately carved wooden doorways. The port is filled with the familiar sight of Arab dhows, but the people are new and fascinating to your eyes. The Swahili merchants and nobles, dressed in fine cotton and silk robes, greet the Chinese with warmth and curiosity. A great diplomatic and commercial exchange begins. Not every encounter is so friendly, however. The fleet also pays a visit to Malindi's rival, the powerful island city of Mombasa. Here the reception is much cooler. The Sultan of Mombasa is wary of these powerful newcomers and their close relationship with his enemy. The welcome is frosty and the Mombasans are uncooperative. Zheng is forced to make a demonstration of his power. He orders his warships to form a line and fire their cannons. It is likely just a show of force, a volley of blanks or warning shots fired out to sea, not a bombardment of the city itself. But the message is clear. It's the 15th century equivalent of revving your engine loudly in someone's driveway to let them know you mean business. Suitably intimidated, Mombasa agrees to open negotiations. The physical proof of these encounters lies scattered in the red soil of the Kenyan coast. To this day, archaeologists have unearthed caches of early 15th century Chinese porcelain shards and Yongle-era coins at multiple Swahili sites. The tangible, indestructible footprints of the treasure fleet's visit. The official records are clear that the fleet reached at least as far south as Malindi. But did they go further? Historians still argue whether some squadrons of the fleet, perhaps smaller scouting missions, continued to sail down the coast. Could they have reached the great gold exporting port of Sofala, in what is now Mozambique? Some have even made the extraordinary claim that they rounded the Cape of Good Hope into the Atlantic, though there is no credible evidence to support this. The maps and records are ambiguous, leaving tantalizing room for speculation. But the main purpose of the African voyage is a resounding success: to acquire more of the exotic beasts that had so enchanted the emperor. The King of Malindi, delighted with his new alliance, is happy to oblige. The Chinese are able to procure more giraffes, as well as zebras, which they called celestial horses, and ostriches, which they dubbed camel birds. The holds of the treasure ships, once filled with silks and porcelain, are now being converted into pens for a floating, and undoubtedly very seasick, menagerie. At this point, the officer in charge of animal husbandry has the most stressful job in the entire fleet. Admiral, the zebras are kicking the walls down again, and the ostriches have laid an egg in the gunpowder magazine. The journey to Africa has been a triumph. Direct contact has been established, new powerful trading partners have been found, and the fleet is returning with living proof of a whole new continent of wonders. The known world, for the Ming Empire, has just gotten immeasurably larger and infinitely more interesting. Having navigated the delicate diplomacy of the Swahili courts, you now venture into the true heart of these African city-states, the marketplace. You leave the cool coral stone palaces behind and plunge into a vibrant, chaotic, and overwhelmingly sensory world. This is not the orderly, state-managed transaction you witnessed in Calicut. This is a bustling open-air bazaar, a riot of color, sound, and smell, where the immense wealth of an entire continent is brought to the sea. The first thing you notice is that the goods here are different. The Swahili merchants are the gatekeepers, the coastal middlemen. The treasures they offer are not of their own making. They are the products of the vast, mysterious African interior, brought to the coast after months-long journeys by caravan. The market is a showcase for the wonders of a continent that, to the Chinese, is a complete and utter mystery. Your eyes are immediately drawn to the piles of ivory, great, curving elephant tusks, some longer than a man is tall, are stacked like firewood. The Chinese have elephants in their own southern provinces, but African ivory is a different class of material. It is larger, harder, and has a finer grain, making it the most prized ivory in the world for the master carvers back in the Ming capital. It is a substance of pure, creamy white luxury, and the Chinese merchants, their eyes wide, immediately begin to negotiate for it. In another corner of the market, you see the legendary wealth of Africa in its rawest form, gold. While the main hub for the gold trade is further south, a steady stream of the precious metal, traded from the great inland kingdom of Zimbabwe, makes its way to these northern ports. It is sold as fine dust in leather pouches, a currency of pure value that is understood by every merchant from here to Beijing. But it is the smells that truly transport you. You push through the crowd and are hit by a thick, heady, and deeply spiritual aroma. It is the scent of frankincense and myrrh. Merchants from the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula are selling large amber-colored tiers of these aromatic tree resins. In China, these substances are fantastically expensive and are used as the primary ingredients in incense for sacred temple ceremonies, as well as in a wide variety of medicines. The air in this part of the market is a prayer, a perfume, and a pharmacy all at once. And then there are the even more exotic goods, the products of Africa's unique and legendary fauna. There are merchants selling the horns of the rhinoceros, a substance believed in Chinese medicine to hold powerful healing properties. There are the iridescent hides of leopards and the great soft plumes of ostrich feathers, both destined to become ceremonial adornments for the Ming elite. But the strangest and most valuable commodity of all is one you might not even recognize. A merchant opens a wooden box to reveal a lumpy, waxy, grayish substance. This is ambergris. It is a rare product of the digestive system of the sperm whale, a substance that forms in its intestines and is eventually expelled into the ocean, where it floats for years before washing up on a lucky beach. And what is this strange, waxy lump of whale byproduct used for? It is one of the most valuable perfume fixatives in the world, prized for its ability to make a scent last longer. A single large piece is worth a fortune. It's basically a lump of whale guts gunk, which naturally meant it was worth more than its weight in gold. In exchange for this incredible bounty, the Chinese offer their own manufactured treasures. You see Swahili nobles and wealthy merchants examining the blue and white porcelain with looks of pure admiration. These ceramics are a status symbol of the highest order, and the fragments of broken Ming bowls and plates are now the key artifacts that allow modern archaeologists to trace the Fleet AS footsteps. The exact mechanics of this trade are still a matter of some debate. Historians still argue whether the commerce was conducted purely through the barter of these high-value luxury goods, or if the Chinese also used their own currency, the small copper coins with a square hole in the middle, as a medium of exchange. Thousands of these coins have been found on the Kenyan coast, but were they used as cash by the locals, or were they kept as valuable exotic trinkets melted down for their metal or simply lost? You stand in the middle of this vibrant market, a sailor from the other side of the planet. The world you are in is profoundly new. The people, the goods, the very air you are breathing, it is all a revelation. This journey has not just expanded the emperor's tribute system or the holds of his ships, it has expanded the minds of every single person who has made the voyage. The holds of the fleet are now being filled with the wonders of Africa, treasures that will once again cause a sensation when they arrive, finally, back home in the Middle Kingdom. You stand on the high deck of the flagship as it sails east, leaving the shores of Africa to shrink into a memory. The holds below are a cacophony of smells and sounds, the pungent aroma of spices, the earthy scent of ivory, and the occasional disgruntled squawk from an ostrich. The mission has been a staggering success, pushing the boundaries of the known world further than any Chinese emperor has ever dared. And as you reflect on all that you have seen, from the royal courts of Java to the markets of Calicut and the coral stone cities of Africa, a clear and consistent pattern of behavior emerges, a grand strategy that is as remarkable as the ships themselves. You have witnessed the fleet arrive in dozens of foreign ports. You have seen it interact with kings, sultans, and chieftains. You have seen it trade, negotiate, and even fight. But there is a stunning consistency in what it has not done. It has not conquered a single square inch of foreign soil. It has not established a single permanent colony. It has not overthrown a single legitimate ruler to install a Chinese governor. It has not forced the Chinese language, religion, or culture on anyone. With a military force that could have effortlessly crushed any opposition it encountered, the fleet consistently, deliberately chose diplomacy over dominion. This was not an accident. It was the entire point of the mission. The treasure fleet was not an instrument of colonial conquest in the way we have come to understand it from the later European age of discovery. Its primary purpose was to project the soft power of the Ming dynasty and to enroll the nations of the world into China as traditional international order, the tribute system. It was a mission of invitation, not invasion. The goal was not to make other countries Chinese, but to have other countries acknowledge that China was the undisputed center of the civilized world. The contrast with the European model that would follow a few decades later is stark. When Vasco da Gama's small ships arrived in these same waters, their methods were brutal and direct. They came to conquer key ports, monopolize the spice trade through violence, and spread their religion by the sword. The Chinese brought priceless porcelain and silk as gifts. The Portuguese brought cannons and a demand for submission. It was a fundamentally different worldview. The Chinese saw themselves as the self-sufficient center, the Middle Kingdom, whose emperor simply needed to make his glory known to the outer barbarian world. The Europeans saw themselves as being on the periphery, and their goal was to go out and extract the wealth of the world by force. Of course, this Chinese approach was not pure pacifism. The soft power of their culture and the economic incentives of their trade were only effective because they were backed by the overwhelming hard power of the fleet. It was the quintessential iron fist in a velvet glove. The diplomatic visits were always conducted with a full, intimidating military escort. The battle against the pirate Chen Zuyi was a clear and bloody demonstration of the consequences of defiance. The cannon fire demonstration at Mombasa was a less bloody, but equally clear reminder. Zheng was a master of speaking softly, but everyone knew he was carrying a very, very big stick. In his case, a 440-foot-long stick with 9 masts. This grand diplomatic project also connected with and empowered the existing Chinese diaspora. For centuries, communities of Chinese merchants and craftsmen had been living in the port cities of Southeast Asia. The arrival of the treasure fleet would have been a momentous event for them, a powerful affirmation of their connection to their homeland. These overseas communities became unofficial outposts of Ming influence, helping the fleet's diplomats and translators navigate the complex local politics. But was this system, for all its lack of outright conquest, truly benign? Historians still argue whether the tribute system was a fair and mutually beneficial framework for international relations or simply a more subtle, less violent form of imperialism. Did it create a stable world order, or a hegemonic one where smaller states were forced into a subordinate and dependent relationship with China? Their sovereignty compromised even without an occupying army? Was it a gentler empire, or just an empire by another name? You look out at the fleet, a floating city that functions as a perfect microcosm of this policy. It is a world of merchants, diplomats, and scholars, but it is also a world of 20,000 soldiers. It is a vessel of peace and trade that also happens to be a terrifying engine of war. This is the complex reality of the Yongle Emperor's vision. He sought to create a peaceful, China-centric world order, and he was perfectly willing to use overwhelming violence against anyone who disagreed with that vision. The fleet was an invitation to join his new world order, but it was an invitation that was very, very difficult to refuse. For months you have witnessed the grand spectacle of the treasure fleet from a distance, seeing it as an instrument of policy, a tool of diplomacy, a feat of engineering. But a fleet is not just wood and sails, it is people, nearly 30,000 of them. And to truly understand this enterprise, you must now immerse yourself in the daily, grinding reality of their life at sea. You must understand what it was like to call this floating city home. The day begins before dawn, not with the crowing of a rooster, but with the sharp, percussive clang of a gong or the beat of a drum. This is the signal for the changing of the watch. You awaken in the cramped, dark, and perpetually damp crew quarters below deck. You are in a hammock, one of hundreds strung up in the tight space between the massive wooden ribs of the ship. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, bilge water, and stale rice. The ship is never still. There is a constant, gentle rocking, a ceaseless creaking of timbers, and the rush of water against the hull. This is the soundtrack of your life. This is a world of rigid military-style hierarchy. At the very top are Admiral Zheng and his coterie of high-ranking eunuch officials who live in relative luxury in the spacious private cabins on the upper decks of the treasure ships. Below them are the military commanders, the civilian specialists, doctors, astronomers, scribes, and the junior officers. But the vast bulk of the population is made up of the thousands of common soldiers and sailors who perform the endless back-breaking labor that keeps the city afloat. For the sailors, the daily routine is grueling. They are responsible for managing the vast and complex rigging of the 9-masted ships. They haul on heavy hempen ropes to adjust the sails. They climb the terrifyingly high masts to make repairs. They scrub the decks and they stand watch for hours on end, their eyes scanning the empty horizon. For the soldiers, life is a routine of drills on the open decks, practicing with their swords and spears and endlessly maintaining their weapons and armor against the corrosive sea salt. And then there is the food. How do you feed a city of this size? The answer is, with staggering, monotonous efficiency. The staple of every meal is rice, served from huge steaming cauldrons. This is supplemented with salted fish, pickled vegetables, and fermented soybeans. What's on the menu for breakfast? Rice porridge or congee. For lunch, a bowl of steamed rice with some salty fish. For dinner, you guessed it, more rice. The fresh vegetables grown on deck, the livestock, and the better cuts of fish were reserved for the officers. For the common sailor, it was a bland, unchanging diet designed for pure fuel. Health was a constant battle. Scurvy, the debilitating disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was an ever-present threat, which the fleet's doctors fought by cultivating fresh ginger and soybeans on board. The medical staff were highly skilled practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine, armed with a vast pharmacopoeia of herbs and remedies to treat everything from battle wounds to seasickness. But in this crowded environment, any infectious disease could spread with terrifying speed. And what about life beyond the work? How did these thousands of men, trapped together for years at a time, maintain their sanity and morale? Gambling was almost certainly rampant, with dice games played for copper coins in the shadowed corners of the crew quarters. There would have been storytellers, their tales of home or mythological heroes a welcome escape from the boredom. And there would have been music, the sound of a simple flute or a drum to accompany a work song. The celebration of major festivals, especially the Lunar New Year, would have been a critical release, a moment of community and a reminder of the culture they had left behind. The fleet was a floating Tower of Babel. The crew was drawn from all over the vast Ming Empire, and they spoke a dozen different, often mutually unintelligible dialects. On top of that, the official team of interpreters had to be fluent in Arabic, Persian, Tamil, and a host of other languages. These interpreters were some of the most critical personnel in the entire fleet. They were the 15th century version of a universal translator, and a single mistake could be the difference between a successful trade deal and an international incident. But for all our knowledge of the fleet's organization, a profound and sobering question remains. What was the human cost? The official records are silent on the mortality rate. Historians still argue whether these voyages suffered from a brutally high death toll due to disease, accidents, and combat, which the Ming court considered an acceptable price for glory, or if their advanced medical care and logistics resulted in a surprisingly high survival rate for the era. Of the 27,800 men who set out on the first voyage, we will never know how many saw their homes and families again. You stand on the deck at the end of a long day, watching the sun dip below the watery horizon. Life here is a paradox, a highly organized, disciplined, and purposeful existence, yet one that is also filled with immense hardship, boredom, and danger. The success of this floating city is a testament not just to the genius of its commanders, but to the quiet, anonymous endurance of the thousands of men who called it home. While Zheng and his 27,000 men are battling storms, navigating treacherous waters, and dazzling the courts of foreign kings, a very different kind of battle is being waged back home. To understand it, you must leave the salt-sprayed deck of the treasure ship and return to the quiet, perfumed, and infinitely more dangerous corridors of the Forbidden City. Here in the heart of the Empire, a powerful faction is watching the voyages with growing disapproval. The greatest threat to the treasure fleet is not a pirate or a foreign navy. It is a quiet army of men in silk robes, armed not with swords, but with ink brushes. You are in the vast, echoing halls of the imperial bureaucracy, a world of paper, ink, and ancient tradition. This is the domain of the Confucian scholar bureaucrats. These are the highly educated intellectual elites who have passed the grueling civil service examinations and who form the permanent administrative backbone of the Chinese state. They are the government, and they, as a class, hate the treasure fleet. Their opposition is not just a matter of professional jealousy. It is a deep-seated philosophical, economic, and political conflict. First, there is the philosophical objection. The worldview of the Confucian scholar is fundamentally agrarian and inward-looking. The bedrock of a healthy, stable society, according to their philosophy, is agriculture. The land is the only true source of wealth. Merchants, on the other hand, were seen as parasitic, a necessary evil at best who produced nothing of their own, but merely profited from moving goods around. The treasure fleet, a massive state-sponsored commercial enterprise, was therefore ideologically offensive. It elevated the grubby business of trade to a matter of imperial glory. To the scholars, their idea of a good time was a perfectly balanced budget and a bumper crop of rice. A voyage to Africa to acquire a celestial horse was the height of frivolity. Furthermore, the ideal Confucian state is a self-sufficient one. China, the Middle Kingdom, is the center of all civilization. It has everything it needs. The lands beyond its borders are populated by barbarians, who have little to offer besides a chance to be transformed by the emperor's virtue. The proper role of the state is to look inward, to perfect its own society, to maintain harmony and order within its own borders. These grand, expensive foreign adventures were seen as a dangerous distraction from the real business of governance. This leads to the economic objection. The voyages were, to put it mildly, ruinously expensive. The cost of building hundreds of colossal ships, paying and feeding a crew of nearly 30,000 men for years at a time, and the incredibly lavish gifts the emperor bestowed upon foreign rulers represented a staggering drain on the imperial treasury. The bureaucrats, who were the accountants of the empire, saw this as an outrageous waste. They argued with some justification that this money would be far better spent on practical matters at home, shoring up the dikes on the Yellow River, maintaining the Grand Canal, providing famine relief, or, most importantly, funding the armies that guarded China's northern frontier against the ever-present threat of the Mongols. They were, in essence, the perpetually grumpy fund police of the imperial budget office. But the most potent reason for their opposition was political. The treasure fleet was not their project. It was conceived by, commanded by, and brought glory to their mortal enemies in the great power struggle of the Ming court, the eunuch faction. The eunuchs, as the emperor's personal servants, operated outside the normal bureaucratic channels. The Yongle emperor, a usurper who deeply distrusted the scholars, empowered his eunuchs to an unprecedented degree. Zheng, a eunuch, was the face of the voyages. The success and prestige of the fleet directly translated into more power and influence for the entire eunuch establishment. For the scholars, opposing the voyages was not just a matter of policy. It was a critical battle in their centuries-long turf war against their political rivals. You can feel the tension in the air at court. The scholars cannot openly defy the powerful and ruthless Yongle emperor, but they can engage in a campaign of bureaucratic resistance. You hear the whispers in the hallways. You see the memorials they submit to the throne, couched in beautifully written, respectful language that subtly criticize the cost of the expeditions. They slow-walk requisitions for supplies. They question the budget allocations. They are fighting a war of 1,000 paper cuts. But as long as the Yongle emperor is alive, Their opposition is a muted grumble. The fleet is his personal passion project, and his will is absolute. But the ideological foundation for the end of the voyages is being carefully laid. Historians still argue whether this Confucian backlash was a powerful, active force that managed to curtail the scope of the voyages even during the emperor's lifetime, or if it was a more marginal opinion that only gained the power to act after he was gone. Was he holding back a dam of criticism that was just waiting for the chance to burst? You stand in the quiet, scholarly silence of a bureaucrat's office, a world away from the roaring winds of the Indian Ocean. While Zheng is making history, the men who will write the official history are sharpening their knives. The fate of the greatest fleet on Earth will not be decided in a battle at sea, but here, in a war of memos and political intrigue within the red walls of the Forbidden City. For 20 years, the treasure fleet has been the ultimate expression of a single man's iron will. The Yongle Emperor, the warrior, the usurper, the grand visionary, has poured the wealth of his empire into this unprecedented maritime adventure. As long as he sits on the dragon throne, the voyages are untouchable, his personal passion project protected from the sniping of the court bureaucrats. But no man, not even the Son of Heaven, rules forever. The year is 1424. The emperor, now in his 60s, is not resting in his magnificent Forbidden City. He is where he has always been most comfortable, on the battlefield. You are with his army on the vast windswept grasslands of the Mongolian steppe, on his fifth and final campaign against the northern nomads. The air is thin and cold. The landscape is a harsh, unforgiving expanse of brown earth and gray sky. It is here, far from the splendors of his court, that the great emperor's life comes to a quiet and anticlimactic end. He falls ill and dies, not in a blaze of glory, but quietly, in his campaign tent. His death is a moment of immense political peril. His most trusted eunuch advisors conceal his passing from the rest of the army, placing his body in a carriage and rushing it back towards Beijing. They must secure the succession for his chosen heir before their political rivals can make a move. The great visionary who kicked open China's door to the world dies in secret, his body traveling for days under a scorching sun. Back in the capital, his eldest son, Zhu Gaoji, ascends the throne. He takes the reign name the Hongxi Emperor, and he is, in every respect, his father's opposite. Where the Yongle Emperor was a dynamic, ruthless warrior, the Hongxi Emperor is a cautious, contemplative scholar. Where his father was lean and athletic, he is morbidly obese and in poor health. And where his father trusted his eunuchs and dreamed of maritime glory, the new emperor has spent his entire life tutored by and sympathetic to the very Confucian scholar bureaucrats who despise the treasure fleet. The moment the news of the old emperor's death is confirmed, the political winds in the Forbidden City shift with the speed of a hurricane. The Confucian officials who have been biding their time for 2 decades are now in total control. Their student is on the throne, and their moment has come. The Hongxi Emperor's first day in office is a busy one. He immediately issues a series of edicts that systematically dismantle his father's entire expansionist legacy. The first and most dramatic order is aimed directly at the treasure fleet. All voyages, effective immediately, are to be stopped. Zheng, who is at that moment preparing for a 7th expedition, is ordered to cease all work. The fleet is to be recalled to its bases. The construction of any new ocean-going ships is forbidden. Foreign envoys who have arrived in China are to be sent home with their tribute. In a few strokes of an ink brush, the door that his father had thrown open to the world is slammed shut, bolted and barred. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the Ministry of Finance. Finally, no more expense reports for giraffe fodder. It is one of the most stunning and abrupt policy reversals in history. The greatest naval fleet in the world, at the absolute zenith of its power and reach, is ordered into retirement by a new administration on its very first day in office. It is a historical irony that the Hongxi Emperor's reign would be one of the shortest in Ming history. He would die of a heart attack after only 9 months. Yet, in that short time, he set in motion the permanent end of China's age of exploration. There was one final brief reprieve. The Hongxi Emperor's son, the Xuande Emperor, who was more like his grandfather Yongle, authorized one last voyage in 1431. It was a mission to shore up the diplomatic ties that had withered. Zheng, now an old man, was given command of this seventh and final expedition. He would not return, likely dying of illness on the return journey and being buried at sea. After this last grand voyage, the political will was gone forever. The party was well and truly over, so why was the reversal so swift and so absolute? Historians still argue whether the decision to cancel the voyages was primarily an economic one, a pragmatic choice by a new emperor facing an empty treasury after his father's extravagant spending, or if it was a profoundly ideological one, a rejection of an entire worldview. Was it simply about the money? Or was it a conscious decision to turn China away from the sea and back towards its agrarian, inward-looking traditions? The truth is likely a combination of both. But the event reveals the immense stabilizing power of the Chinese bureaucratic system. The Yongle Emperor's reign, with its epic construction projects and global naval expeditions, was the anomaly. It was a period driven by the unique, forceful personality of a single man. With that man gone, the system simply reverted to its default setting: fiscally conservative, agriculturally focused, and deeply skeptical of foreign adventures. It was like a powerful computer which had been forced to run a wild, resource-intensive video game for 20 years, was suddenly shut down and rebooted into its normal, boring spreadsheet program. The game was over. The emperor is dead. The policy is reversed. The political will that powered the greatest fleet on Earth has vanished like a puff of smoke. And now, you must witness the final, tragic consequence of this political reversal. You travel to the great naval base at Taikang, near the mouth of the Yangtze River. Here, anchored in the vast harbor, is the pride of the Ming dynasty, the armada that had awed the world. And it is being left to die. The fleet is idle. The thousands of sailors and soldiers have been dismissed or reassigned to less glorious posts. The great admiral, Zheng, is an old man. His life's work now officially designated a failure. The ships themselves, once the scene of such bustling, purposeful activity, now sit silent and empty, rocking gently on the tide. They are a navy without a mission, an army without a war, a ghost fleet crewed only by the memories of its own glory. The new policy of the scholar bureaucrats is not just to cancel future voyages, but to erase the very capability of ever launching them again. They refuse to allocate any funds from the imperial treasury for the fleet's maintenance. And a ship, particularly a wooden one, is a thing that requires constant, expensive care. The tung oil that protected their massive hulls is no longer applied. The sails are not repaired, the rigging is not replaced. You watch, over the course of months and years, as the slow, relentless process of decay begins. The brilliant red of the sails fades to a moldy pink, and then tatters in the coastal winds. Weeds and barnacles begin to encrust the magnificent hulls. Rainwater pools on the decks, seeping into the wood and starting the process of rot. It is a deliberate, calculated demolition by neglect. Some of the smaller support ships are repurposed for coastal defense or grain transport. But the great treasure ships, the giants of the sea, are too large and too expensive to be used for any other purpose. They are white elephants, and they are now an embarrassment to the new regime. Some are broken down, their priceless giant timbers of teak and fir repurposed to build government buildings or temples. Others are simply left at their moorings to rot, eventually taking on water and sinking into the mud of the riverbed. It is a heartbreaking end for the most advanced ships on the planet, but the destruction of the wood and sails is nothing compared to the destruction of the knowledge. The Confucian bureaucrats are not content with just sinking the fleet. They want to sink the very memory of it. In their view, the entire enterprise was a dangerous, expensive, and ideologically corrupting folly. It was an aberration in Chinese history, and they were determined to ensure that no future emperor could ever be tempted to repeat it. To do that, they had to destroy the evidence. You are now in the Imperial Archives in Beijing, a labyrinth of scrolls and documents containing the administrative memory of the entire empire. Stored here are the most precious documents of all: the official logs from Zheng's 7 voyages. These are not just captain's diaries. They are a priceless repository of navigational, geographic, ethnographic, and economic data. They contain detailed maps of the Indian Ocean, star charts, descriptions of foreign kingdoms, their politics, their customs, their products. It is the most complete and detailed picture of the 15th century world that has ever been compiled, and you watch as it is systematically destroyed. The story, though it comes from a later source, is a chilling one. A vice president of the Ministry of War, a scholar named Liu Daxia, discovers the archives of the voyages. Seeing them as a dangerous temptation for future adventurers, he confiscates them and burns them. He would later justify his actions by claiming the logs were nothing but deceitful exaggerations of bizarre things. It is perhaps the single most devastating act of state-sponsored historical vandalism in the history of exploration. It's like NASA deciding to burn all the mission logs and blueprints from the Apollo program. It is an act of self-inflicted, irreversible ignorance. Now, did it happen exactly like that, in a single dramatic bonfire? Historians still argue whether the destruction was a single, deliberate act of arson by one official, or a more gradual process of neglect and suppression by the entire bureaucratic system. Perhaps the records weren't burned, but were simply lost, deliberately misfiled into archival oblivion, a death by 1,000 administrative shuffles. The end result, however, is the same. The official first-hand accounts of the greatest naval expeditions of the era are gone. What we know today is pieced together from the fragments that survived. Private accounts written by men like the interpreter Ma Huan, the stone monuments Zheng erected in China and abroad, and, most crucially, the navigational charts that were copied into a later military encyclopedia. But these are just scattered pages from a library that has been burned to the ground. The erasure is nearly complete. The ships are gone. The records are gone. The greatest maritime enterprise of its age has been systematically and successfully scrubbed from the official history of the nation that produced it. The dragons of the sea have been slain, not by a foreign enemy but by their own accountants. The ships are gone. The records are ashes. The great age of Chinese maritime exploration has been deliberately and methodically erased from the official memory of the state. And yet, a story this colossal, a human endeavor this vast, can never be completely wiped away. It survives. It survives not as a proud, unbroken narrative, but as a whisper in the historical record, a collection of scattered, tantalizing fragments that only hint at the grandeur that was lost. You are in a quiet library now, far from the smoke of the bonfire and the rot of the shipyards. Before you are the few precious documents that escape the censors, the flotsam and jetsam that have washed up on the shores of our modern age. Our entire understanding of these 7 epic voyages is pieced together from these scraps. There are the personal accounts of 3 men who sailed with the fleet, the Muslim interpreter Ma Huan and his colleagues Fei Xin and Gongzhen. Their books, with titles like The Overall Survey of the Ocean's Shores, are our only surviving eyewitness narratives, filled with invaluable details about the kingdoms, the customs, and the trade goods they encountered. There are the great stone monuments that Zheng himself erected, their inscriptions providing a bombastic but crucial summary of his achievements. There are the navigational charts, the Maokun map, which survived only because it was copied into a much later military encyclopedia. And there is the physical evidence, the handful of Yongle-era coins found in the Kenyan dirt, the shards of blue and white porcelain that still litter the beaches of the Indian Ocean, and the beautiful court painting of the giraffe that was mistaken for a mythical killin. This is all that remains. We are trying to reconstruct a lost world from a handful of postcards and souvenirs, and it is this fragmented, incomplete record that gives rise to the greatest and most tantalizing game that historians like to play, the game of what if? What if the Yongle Emperor had lived another 20 years? What if his cautious, scholarly son had not ascended the throne at that critical moment? What if the Confucian bureaucrats had lost their political battle with the eunuchs? What if the voyages had not stopped? Allow yourself to imagine this alternate timeline. The year is 1497. A small squadron of 3 Portuguese ships, battered by their long and arduous journey around the tip of Africa, sails into the Indian Ocean. Their commander, Vasco da Gama, is searching for the source of the spice trade. In our timeline, he found a politically fragmented ocean, a power vacuum that the Portuguese could exploit with their cannons and their aggression. But in this alternate timeline, he finds something very different. He finds a Pax Sinica, a Chinese peace. The entire ocean, from the Strait of Malacca to the Swahili coast, is a well-policed, highly organized commercial system under the watchful eye of the Ming Imperial Navy. Imagine Da Gama's arrival in Calicut. He is met not just by the Zamarin, but by a Chinese harbor master who directs him to the designated anchorage for barbarian tribute ships. He sees the harbor filled not just with Arab dhows, but with the colossal 9-masted treasure ships of the Ming dynasty, now a permanent fixture in these waters. His report back to the King of Portugal would have been slightly different. "Good news, Your Majesty. We have found the route to the Indies. Bad news, it appears to be owned and operated by a superpower that uses ships the size of a cathedral." The European age of discovery, as we know it, would have been stillborn. The brutal European colonization of Asia, the monopolization of the spice trade, the centuries of conflict, it might never have happened. The course of world history would have been irrevocably altered. So what kind of world would that have been? Historians still argue whether a continued Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean would have resulted in a more stable and peaceful form of global trade, or if it would have inevitably led to a massive clash of civilizations, a true world war between the rising powers of Europe and the established empire of China. Would China's tribute system, the velvet glove of diplomacy, have been able to withstand the iron fist of European colonial ambition? It is the ultimate fantasy league for history nerds. But the questions are profound. The rise of the West, the Industrial Revolution, the entire shape of our modern world was built on the foundation of European maritime dominance and the wealth they extracted from their global empires. If that dominance had been checked in the 15th century by an established Chinese naval power, it is not an exaggeration to say that the world you and I live in today would be a completely different place. The decision by a handful of bureaucrats in the Forbidden City to scuttle the fleet and burn the logs was not just an act of internal Chinese politics. It was, in retrospect, one of the most consequential decisions ever made. It was an act of unilateral disarmament on a global scale. China, the world's preeminent naval power, voluntarily, deliberately, ceded the oceans of the world. And in doing so, they created a vast power vacuum. A vacuum that, 70 years later, the small, scrappy, and relentlessly ambitious nations of Western Europe would be only too happy to fill. It is a story not just of a lost past, but of a lost future. You close the book. The whispers from the archives fade, and you are left in the quiet of the present, the game of what if over. The alternate timelines dissolve, leaving only the stark, fascinating, and ultimately tragic shape of what actually happened. The story of the treasure fleet is more than just a tale of giant ships and exotic animals. It is a profound and necessary correction to the map of history we all carry in our heads. For centuries, the story of global exploration was told as a uniquely European saga. It was a narrative that began in the late 15th century, with brave Portuguese and Spanish sailors venturing out from a small corner of the world to discover and connect the rest of the planet. It's a powerful story, but it is a profoundly incomplete one. It's like reading a history of music that begins with Elvis Presley, completely ignoring the centuries of blues, folk, and classical music that came before. The voyages of Zheng force us to recenter our understanding, to acknowledge that long before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west, the seas were already being explored by a power with a different vision, from a different center. The world of the early 15th century was not a dark, disconnected, and silent place, waiting for a European spotlight. The Indian Ocean was already a vibrant, thriving, and deeply interconnected world, a network of trade and culture that had existed for 1,000 years. And into this world sailed the Chinese, not as pioneers in a void, but as the new, undisputed heavyweight champions. Their achievements, when viewed in this global context, are stunning. They built ships of a size that would not be seen again for centuries. They navigated with a skill and technological prowess that was unmatched. They projected their nation's power across 7,000 miles of ocean, from the South China Sea to the coast of Africa. And they did it all with a fundamentally different purpose: Theirs was not a mission of conquest, colonization, or religious conversion. It was a grand, imperial project to order the world, not to remake it. They came to display their own glory and to invite the nations of the world to participate in a China-centric system of trade and tribute. It was an idea of world power based on prestige and magnetism, not on permanent occupation and extraction. Some have even speculated that the legend of Sinbad the Sailor, with his tales of voyages to distant and wondrous lands, may have been partly inspired by the awesome sight of these Chinese fleets, which would have been a major topic of conversation in the ports of the Persian Gulf. But in the end, what is the ultimate legacy of these incredible voyages? Historians still argue whether the expeditions represent the glorious, natural climax of China's long maritime history, or if they were a spectacular but unsustainable folly, a grand imperial overreach that ultimately helped to bankrupt the dynasty and justify the very isolationism that followed. Was it the greatest achievement of a seafaring culture, or the magnificent mistake that ended it? The tragedy is that the choice to forget was as grand as the choice to explore. The Ming dynasty, the only power capable of creating such a fleet, was also the only power capable of destroying it so completely. The story of Zheng was forgotten not because it was insignificant, but because the state itself decided it was an inconvenient truth, an expensive and dangerous precedent that needed to be erased. And so it was. It became a whisper, a ghost story in the archives. It is a profound reminder that history is not just about what happened, but about who gets to tell the story and which stories are chosen to be remembered. History, it turns out, has more deleted scenes than any director's cut. The story of the treasure fleet challenges us to see the past, not as a straight line leading inevitably to our present, but as a complex landscape of different paths, different possibilities, and lost worlds. It reminds us that our world was not the only possible one. Before Columbus, there was a different world, with a different center and a different kind of power sailing on its seas. And with that final, quiet thought, our journey into this lost chapter of history comes to an end. The image of the great treasure ships, with their towering red sails, begins to fade, dissolving like a ghost ship into the mists of time. The sounds of the bustling shipyards and the exotic markets fall silent, replaced by the deep, peaceful quiet of the historical record. The great what-ifs and the haunting questions can be set aside for now. Let the story settle. Let the sheer wonder of it all be the final memory. The voyage is over. You can allow your mind to drift back from the distant shores of the past, back to the simple, quiet comfort of your own room, and the soft, steady hum of the fan.